Every Sunday, I march out into the midst of the congregation and read a portion of one of our four Gospels that are appointed for that particular Sunday. It is intended to be the climax of our source of God's Word, having read both from the Hebrew Scriptures and from the letters, the epistles. We end that presentation by proclaiming the gospel of the Lord. The word gospel in its Greek and Latin origins means good news. Good news. So supposedly I have just proclaimed to you good news. I quote, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple." Beloved, if that's good news, I sure in hell don't want to hear the bad news. He goes on to point out that you have sense enough to calculate what you need to build a building, that you don't start building unless you have enough to complete it. Or if you're a warrior and you see an army coming and you count your own resources, do you have enough troops to win or not? And if you don't, then you send a delegation and try to arrange a peaceful settlement. Jesus is on the road. He's on the road to Jerusalem from northern Galilee. He has with him his disciples, and along the way picks up followers, all of whom are desperately looking for something in their own lives. Some are sick and are seeking wellness. Some are crippled and are looking for healing. Many are lost in their own lives, and are looking for some sure place to be. These are desperate people. Really desperate. Begin with, they are poor. Terribly poor. Taxed beyond belief. Under the rule of a foreign government, their own leaders having sold out, their religious leaders conspire along with the occupying forces, all supposedly to keep the peace. They're all hungry. We don't know what it is like in our own lives and in our own nation to live under the domination of a foreign power. They woke up to it and went to bed with it every single day. So they're hungry. They're hungry for food. They're hungry for good news. They're hungry for freedom. They're hungry to hear the good news. Gospel. You see, power is the major determining factor in each of our lives. How often have you thought to yourself, if I just had the power to get a better job? If I just had the power to cure the illness. If I just had the power to make the broken relationship whole once more time. I talked to a dear old friend last week on Wednesday who said to me, my husband and I are headed to the divorce court. And there's nothing I can do to change it. I'm powerless. We all know what it is like to be caught in some situation where we are powerless to make something different, something better happen. For the last few days I've been texting back and forth with my friend who lives near Savannah. Offered my home for him to evacuate to. It's 9 miles off the river. Last text I got back said, quote, I paid a hell of a lot of money to build this house and make it waterproof, and I'm not going anywhere. Foolish maybe, but characteristic of one who usually chooses to fight as opposed to flight. When Jesus tells the folks who say they want to be His followers that they must hate whatever stands in the way of their following, the word hate in English, in Hebrew, means to turn away from. To turn away from. Previously in this gospel, a man tells Jesus he wants to be His disciples, he wants to follow Him, but first he has to go and say goodbye to his family. And Jesus says, you have to choose now. If you hate your family, then you can choose. What He's saying is, you have to turn away from what you have and what you know to go a new way. So that word hate in our language is a little strong, but if you understand it means you have to give up something. You have to turn away from what you're doing. You have to go in a different direction. Unfortunately, most of us have grown up believing that faith is something you either have or don't have, that you usually acquire it by being religious, reading Scripture, worshiping regularly, saying your prayers. And there's certainly nothing wrong with any of that. But I think faith has something to do entirely different. I think faith is something you catch. Something you catch. Not something necessarily you learn. I learned a lot in seminary. 3 years of Old Testament, New Testament, homiletics, pastoral care. Didn't ensure that I had faith. What it did ensure was whether I had a decent mind or not. All of us struggle to be faithful, and it is a struggle. I think faith has to do with what you learn from choices you make. What you learn from choices you make. Paul's letter to Philemon that we read this morning is interesting. I'll tell you a little bit of the background. Paul is in Rome and he's writing to an old friend, Philemon, in Colossae. Paul had converted his friend to faith. Philemon was wealthy, a good man. He owned a slave. slave's name was Onesimus. Onesimus was a sorry slave. One day he got loose in Philemon's house, found everything of value, packed up, and left. He ultimately made his way to Rome, and things did not go well for him. He ran out of money, didn't have a place to live, had no friends, skirting the law. And one day he seeks out Paul. You remember me, don't you? And he asks for help. Paul takes him in. He takes care of it. A relationship develops. And over a period of time, Onesimus becomes faithful. Faithful to Paul, but more importantly, faithful to God. He gets his life together. Paul needs to go on with other things, and we know that ultimately he will be arrested and put to death. Tells Onesimus to go back to Philemon. Go back and correct his life, start over. And Paul writes that letter that we read this morning to Philemon. He wants him to take Onesimus back, but not as a slave. As he says, a brother in the faith. A brother in the faith. That's what he asks. What will he do? Will he take him back as a brother? Paul even offers to repay the amount of money and goods that Onesimus had stolen. The ball is in Philemon's court. What will he do? What will he do? Will he let him come and sit at his table and eat? Will he sleep in the house? Will he be a friend? What would you do in that situation? What would you do? Jesus told those who came to him, said they wanted to be a part of him, but they had to first do something else. Say goodbye to their family. In one case, bury a relative. And he says, you have to choose what you're going to do. Choose now. It seems to me that reading leaves with us some questions. Will you come and eat at this table and then go out and care for your neighbor? Will you come to the realization that you don't own anything? Everything you have is on loan. Can you honestly pray, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief? Can you hear, really hear, internally hear those wonderful words, you are marked as Christ's own forever? And then pray to live into that reality? What would Philemon do? what would you do?